Good afternoon, it's Friday the 13th of July 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Garish.
Right.
Trump
is here on Friday the 13th. Well, he arrived last night, of course, and here they all are. We've got the First Lady of the United States on the left, the President, Trump himself, Theresa May, the Prime Minister, and the First Lady of the United Kingdom on the right-hand side there.
So they're in perfect power base order from left to right because, of course, the First Lady controls Trump.
Absolutely.
I would guess.
Now, I've captioned this, there will be no deal, because the furore today, the hysteria today in the mainstream media is about the suggestion that Trump made last night that the UK will probably not get a trade deal with the US on the basis of the Brexit white paper that came out yesterday. We'll come on to that shortly. He gave an exclusive interview to The Sun. Maybe if we can criticise Trump, it's that he's a bit too close to Fox and Murdoch press, perhaps. So he's given his exclusive interview to the Sun, and he said that the Prime Minister would probably, or this new Brexit deal would kill the deal with the United States, because it would mean the US would be dealing with the European Union instead of with the UK. So he's made an observation about the white paper and the deal that's on the table. That, in fact, got quite a bit of response from the BBC this morning with Jacob Rees-Mogg on the BBC Radio 4 Today programme this morning. They were really trying to get Rees-Mogg tied down in sort of anti-Trump, get him to say something against Trump. You know, they were saying, why is it acceptable that a president should intervene in UK politics in this way? And of course, the point that Rees-Mogg made was, well, we're the people asking for a new trade deal with the United States, so it's perfectly reasonable that he would make a comment. He also criticised Sadiq Khan, by the way, for not being a very good mayor of London and not being very good at dealing with terrorism, and that's already resulted in cries of racist and so on against Trump.
Yeah, no mention of the blimp.
No mention of the blimp. He's going to meet the Queen later on. That's pretty exciting for him. I'm sure he's going to be delighted about that. Well, the two First Ladies are doing a quick tour of the countryside. Philip May is taking Melania Trump to the Royal Hospital Chelsea, apparently, to have a look around there at some sick people.
Okay, wonderful.
Wonderful. In the meantime, Donald Trump has, through his director at the White House, has sent a letter to the US Senate. This is covered in the Greek press here. Trump administration wants Senate to lift restrictions on F-35s to Turkey. Now, we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, that there is this move throughout the US political system in the House and in the Senate to try to get Turkey barred from receiving any F-35s and F-35 parts. And why are we mentioning this? Well, it's quite important in light of Trump's visit here, because, of course, the deal that we have with regard to the F-35 is that engine maintenance would be done by the Turkish. And so if they aren't able to get any parts, that is a slight problem for us.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry to be cynical, Mike, but is the sort of flow of the things in Turkey at the moment is that they're going to get the F-35s and then they're getting the S-400 missile to shoot them down?
That's about it, yeah.
Yeah, tricky country.
Tricky country, yes, indeed. Anyway, yesterday the white paper, which was announced earlier in the week, was finally published, but it didn't quite all go to plan because, let's have a look at what happened when Dominic Raab got up to make his statement to the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, today we published the government's white paper on the UK's future relationship with the EU. It is a new and detailed proposal for a principled, pragmatic and ambitious future partnership between the UK and the EU, in line with the policy agreed at Chequers last week. I have now placed a copy of the white paper in the libraries of both houses. Mr. Speaker, as we leave the EU, free movement of people will come to an end. We will control the number of people who come to our country. We will assert stronger security checks at the border.
Order. The Secretary of State is trying to complete his statement in circumstances in which there is manifest discontent in the chamber. Let me say to the right honourable gentleman, whom I welcome to his new responsibilities and whom I congratulate on his promotion to the Cabinet, that I recognise that collective decisions are made upon these matters and they're not all his individual doing. It is a source of considerable unhappiness in this chamber, as is manifest and has been over the last hour or so on both sides of the House, that the right honourable gentleman is delivering a statement about a white paper, copies of which are not currently available to members of the House of Commons.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, both for your warm words. The white paper should have been made available. It will be immediately. It will be made available as soon as is practically possible. And
Order. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for what he said. I'm advised that copies are available to some people. If there are copies in the vote office, all I'm asking the right honourable gentleman is this: is he content, as a member of Her Majesty's government, indeed the Cabinet thereof, that members of Parliament should have a copy of the white paper about which they are to question him? It's quite a simple inquiry.
yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, and just for clarity, it's already available on the website for anyone that wished to procure it that way.
Order. Order. I think, meanwhile, let's hear the conclusion of the... No, I think we'll hear the conclusion of the... Well, I very... Order. Can I say to the Secretary of State... I think we should suspend the... Order. I say to the Secretary of State that it would be very unseemly, discourteous to him and to the members of the House, for his statement to be delivered while copies are being distributed. I will therefore suspend the sitting of the House for 5 minutes.
So they got 5 minutes. As you saw there towards the end, Tories appearing with big boxes of the white paper and literally throwing them around at members of the Labour Party. And then they get 5 minutes to have a look at that. 5 minutes, and I don't think it was mentioned in the clip, but it is in the longer video clip of proceedings that the press had been... No, well, we're coming on to that.
We're coming
right
on
now.
to that.
We're coming on to that right now, because this is a good point. Keir Starmer obviously got the opportunity to respond once the statement was eventually finished, after they'd had their 5-minute recess and the statement was finally finished. This is what he had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the new Secretary of State to his place? I'm sure he doesn't need me to tell him the size of the task he faces, not just negotiating with the Conservative Party, but eventually with the EU as well. So whatever our differences, and there are many, I genuinely wish him well. Can I gently say this? He's not got off to a very good start. The utter shambles of the last 20 minutes that led to the suspension of the House during a statement is clear evidence, Mr. Speaker, of why the government is in such a mess. From their sedentary positions, the front bench comment. Normally I would say thanks in advance for the white paper. But on this occasion, my first question for the Secretary of State is why the government thought it appropriate to share the white paper in full with journalists at 9 a.m. this morning. I think they were given 15 minutes to read it before questions could be asked, unlike the 5 that we adjourned for, and give them hard copies, and only to provide the opposition with a copy 3 hours later. As he will know, my office has been onto his office all morning asking for this white paper. It was delivered at 11:55 a.m. and we saw the shambles that followed. So why was it, in this occasion, on this issue, appropriate to give it to the press at 9 a.m. and to the opposition 3 hours later?
I absolutely take issue with the suggestion that it is a shambles. This was not a shambles. This was deliberate, in my opinion. They have had weeks, if not months, to prepare for the production of this white paper. They've been talking about it since last Friday, and they were unable to get copies of it to the opposition in time for questions. Now, I'm not going to apologise for spending so much time showing what happened in the House of Commons yesterday, because this is a really key point. If we are now at the point, Brian, where white papers on the future of the country are being published by the government, where there's a set time in Parliament for debate of that white paper and for questions to be asked, and that process is being subverted by the sitting government, that is a major constitutional issue.
Mike, this is so important. This is orchestrated deceit by the government. This is not a shambles, as you say. What they've done is attempted to deliberately deceive the opposition and to deceive the public, of course, about what they're doing. Get it out in the media so that the BBC, which is obviously the government's broadcasting arm, can get their policy out. But you don't want to broadcast any of the dissent that UK Parliament is showing going on in Parliament. So this is not a shambles. This is orchestrated deceit. And I think what it also shows, Mike, is that we now have what is effectively a criminal cabal running the country, because these matters are not being discussed in the House at all. We know that the Cabinet Office is a law unto itself, and we now know that inside the Cabinet Office we have the so-called Pearl Office, which is where all the deals are made with the bankers, and that's where the true seat of power for these policies is coming through. So I think that video is now showing us that the pretense of democracy in UK is over. This is a criminal cabal operating. They don't respect the law in this country. They don't respect the constitution. And now we can see clearly they can't even adhere to the rules in Parliament.
Okay, so well, here is the document, the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Well, what is this talking about? The government proposes an innovative and unprecedented economic partnership maintaining frictionless trade through a new UK-EU free trade area underpinned by a common rule book. This is what Dominic Raab said. So we're going to have this free trade area. Is that called a single market? Could be. That is really the core of the UK's proposal, he said. Well, as I say, a common rule book. Britain has said that it's going to sign up to a common rule book, but only apparently where it facilitates this special free trade area. So, well, that looks like a veneer on something which looks pretty similar to what we had before. But anyway, we go on. He said this will support business and meet our shared commitments to Northern Ireland and Ireland, avoiding recourse to the so-called backstop arrangement. So they were very keen to promote the idea that the Northern Irish border situation was absolutely sorted out. The document says at its core, the UK's proposal is the establishment by the UK and EU of a free trade area for goods. This would avoid friction at the border and ensure both sides meet their commitments to Northern Ireland and Ireland through the overall future relationship. So then let's have just a brief look at defence to sort of give an idea of where this actually is taking us. Because obviously security and defence is a large part of this. They talk about ending free movement, but we know that isn't really going to happen, because within the free trade agreement, we're still going to require movement of people backwards and forwards. But the security aspect of it, the document says the UK's defence research and development spending represents around 40% of the EU's total. All of Europe benefits from the strength of this sector. European collaboration is fed to the development of cutting-edge technologies. For example, Meteor, a world-leading air-to-air missile, is the result of collaboration between 6 European nations and has generated significant export orders. The future security partnership should support a collaborative and inclusive approach to European capability development and planning, including exchange and growth of expertise through regular technical knowledge sharing, support by UK liaison presence, collaboration on specific projects, programs and initiatives, including through the European Defence Agency, permanent structured cooperation through a cooperative accord on defence research and development and the European Defence Fund, and C, provisions to ensure a competitive European defence technological and industrial base. So what we see here, Brian, is just taking one example of defence. This is, I'm focusing on this because this is an area that we've been focusing on for the last 2 years, where we've said that Britain is tied into the EU because we're tied into European defence. And despite the denials of local MPs of all colours and creeds and of the government itself, what we have here is an admission within this document that we are absolutely going to take part in the European Defence Agency, Permanent Structured Cooperation and the European Defence Fund. And if we're taking part in the European Defence Fund, then we're going to continue to pay into the European Defence Fund. And we, I believe, are the largest contributor at this point to the European Defence Fund. So nothing is going to change here. This is Brexit without the exit. Everything that's in this paper highlights that. In fact, if you look at it and pull the PR spin off it, what we actually have is the same and more of it, a special, deeper relationship.
Same, more of it, deeper relationship, Mike. And of course, the thing which is immensely dangerous is instead of this being the defence industry, Britain's defence industry drawn in, as we'll call it as a unit, what we showed yesterday with our analysis of the MOD's accelerator unit is, of course, you are now breaking up the state apparatus with all of these private companies coming in for a slice of the pie and the contracts. And that is the mix which is going to go into the European Union system. So what you can see happening is that democracy over a nation's armed forces, ours, is getting even further away from people as the corporations get their snouts into the trough. I'm not sure I explained that very well, but essentially what we are seeing is massive privatisation of the defence system. So that's MOD itself, aside from private contractors, and that is going to be the mix that is going to be working with the Europeans. So where traditional government fits in this remains to be seen, Mike.
Indeed. Now, if I just put this back on screen for a second, the last one, provisions to ensure a competitive European defence technological and industrial base. This is key because this is something that David Ellis in particular has been focusing on for the last year. The fact that British defence industry is going to be consolidated with European defence industry, creating a European defence industry blob. The key point here is the provisions are to ensure a competitive European defence technological and industrial base. Where's the UK in this? The focus is on how can we create a European defence technological and industrial base. And this is a thread that goes right through this document. It's all about Europe, 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 and it's not about the United Kingdom. So if we're talking about a facilitated customs arrangement, and having a common rule book, it's common European rules which we will apply to. So the Europeans the Europeans aren't being asked to meet UK common rules. It's EU common rules that take the priority, and it's the same here with defence, and that should be the clue that gives us a clue to what's actually going on here.
Brexit without the exit.
Absolutely. I just wanted to put this up on screen because Dominic Raab's statement, the government put a transcript of that up on the gov.uk website. And I have to say this is the first time I've seen this. The headline is SOS, Dominic Raab statement on the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union, 12th July 2018. And of course, SOS there means Secretary of State, but I have a suspicion that there is actually a message being sent in that headline. As I say, I have never really noticed headlines on the gov.uk website beginning with SOS before.
They usually put capital SEC, don't they? Sec, state, or something like that.
Anyway, let's move on. European Affairs Council meeting coming up in a couple of days' time, and there's Ms. Mogherini said, well, she didn't actually say this, but this is what she would have said if I'd spoken to her this morning. At this this Foreign Affairs Council meeting, we will work on our policy of encircling Russia. Russia is the enemy, and that's pretty much where we're going with it, because aside from Iran, Libya, and North Korea, which they're going to talk about, the key agenda item is the Eastern Partnership. Now, of course, the Eastern Partnership is this forum which they say aims to improve political and economic relations between the EU and 6 of the former Soviet states, which they consider of, quote, strategic importance. That's Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. So ministers on Monday are going to discuss the implementation of the 20 deliverables for 2020. This framework, they say, aims to achieve stronger economy, governance, connectivity and society in the 6 Eastern partners, which, as I say, are Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, the Republic of Moldova and Ukraine. Now, whenever the EU talks about stronger economies, governance, stronger connectivity and stronger society, they usually mean with a view to eventually being subsumed by the European Union. So this looks like, on a long-term basis, all about EU expansionism.
The supranational state.
Absolutely.
Somebody in the chat box said a few minutes ago that they think that the Brexit row is between US globalists and EU federalists and doesn't really concern the public in Europe at all, which might be quite an astute statement, but we'll see. Well, we're going to move on to the subject of Tommy Robinson. And I have to say that over the last couple of weeks, this is clearly a subject which has aroused much passion in many people. And we've also experienced some pretty hard, is one description, but unpleasant emails coming through to the UK column, because apparently we're not reporting what certain people think we should report. Well, we're going to stick to our guns and report facts. We're going to report what we believe is the truth from those facts. And we're going to take a look today at an article which a number of people flagged up and sent to us and said this needs looking into. So let's start off. This is the Middle East Forum. And if you visit that website, you'll see very clearly it says that the Middle East Forum organises 25,000 strong protest in support of Tommy Robinson, and it plans additional rallies. So no messing around here. We've got a very powerful organisation now stepping up and saying it is going to support Tommy Robinson. But what sort of organisation are we dealing with? Well, this is the statement itself, which I'll do my best to read out as quickly as I can. So Philadelphia, which is one of the bases for the MEF, July the 8th, 2018. And the statement is, Tommy Robinson, the imprisoned English counter-Islamist activist, journalist and book author, justifiably titled his autobiography Enemy of the State, for he has long been a target of the UK authorities, impatient with his criticism of Islamism. The Middle East Forum is helping Robinson in his moment of danger. It does so in the context of its legal project, which since 2007 has defended activists, journalists, politicians et al. Who face harassment, fines or imprisonment because of their views concerning Islamism and related topics. MEF is sponsoring and organising the second Free Tommy Robinson gathering in London on July 14. MEF previously provided all the funding and helped organise the first Free Tommy Robinson event held June the 9th in London. MEF, along with a coalition of UK advocacy groups and international figures, will assemble to advocate for Mr. Robinson's release and demand greater protections for freedom of speech and freedom of the press in the United Kingdom. MEF is arranging for US Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, to travel to London to speak alongside the Dutch political leader Geert Wilders and others. The latest incident began on May the 25th with Mr. Robinson reporting on a rape grooming trial involving Muslim defendants in Leeds, England, for which he was arrested, tried, convicted and sentenced to 13 months in prison and jailed, all in the course of a few hours. To make matters worse, he was tricked out of the right to confer with counsel. Now he has been moved to historically violent Olney prison, where he's a potential target of Islamist gangs. The police allow rape gangs to operate for decades, but swoop down within minutes on Tommy Robinson for a peccadillo, notes Forum President Daniel Pipes. We worry that his life is now in imminent peril. Forum director Greg Roman adds, Western democracy requires a robust public discussion of Islam, including terrorism, terrorist funding, Islamism, immigration and related matters, not its suppression. No matter one's views of Mr. Robinson, all decent people must support his right to discuss controversial matters without fear of arrest, secret trial and imprisonment. The Middle East Forum is aiding Mr. Robinson's defence in three main ways: legally, by using legal project monies to fund his legal defence; diplomatically, by bringing foreign pressure on the UK government to ensure Mr. Robinson's safety and eventual release; politically, by organising and funding the 25,000 person Free Tommy London rally on the 9th of June, and now the July the 14th protest also taking place in London. The Middle East Forum promotes American interests in the Middle East and protects the Western civilization from Middle East threats. For immediate release, for more information, contact Greg Roman, Director, MEF Forum. So there we are, a statement by a very powerful organisation. Is this good or is it not good? Well, I think the key question comes down to what the Middle East Forum is really about. And if we just bring a little bit of detail on screen for them, we've got this, their mission. The Middle East Forum promotes American interests in the Middle East and protects Western values from Middle Eastern threats. The Forum sees the region with its profusion of dictatorships, radical ideologies, existential conflicts, border disagreements, corruption, political violence, and weapons of mass destruction as a major source of problems for the United States. Accordingly, we urge bold measures to protect Americans and their allies. In the Middle East, we focus on ways to defeat radical Islam, work for Palestinian acceptance of Israel, develop strategies to contain Iran, and deal with the great advances of anarchy. At home, the Forum emphasises the danger of lawful Islamism, protects the freedoms of anti-Islamist authors, activists and publishers, and works to improve Middle East studies. We've then got methods, and they say they've got intellectual methods. They provide context, insights, policy recommendations through the Middle East Quarterly, staff writings, lectures, radio, television. Operational, they're exerting what they call active influence through projects like Campus Watch, Islamist Watch, Legal Project, Washington Project, Apartheid Monitor, and so it goes on. Philanthropic, the Forum annually distributes $1.5 million in earmarking donations through its education fund, helping researchers, writers, investigators and activists around the world. So we have the situation that Tommy Robinson is now being helped by what is a vehicle of the US government in the first instance, and the priorities of that organisations are not what is the benefit for people within UK. They are mainly foreign affairs policies for America. But if we get deeper into it, it gets slightly more murky. So we'll take a bit more from their own website, and then there's no doubt as to what we're saying, because one of the things that I was very interested in was this job announcement, Israel Director for the Israel Victory Project. I'll put this up on screen so that you can freeze the screen and have a look at it yourself. But in simple terms, this organisation believes that time has run out for negotiations with the Palestinians in particular, and the only way to move on is for the Palestinians and others to be completely beaten by Israel to such an extent that they know they have been completely beaten, and they're going to then lie down and do presumably as the Israeli state wishes. I found this very, very dark material, Mike, and to think that this organisation is the organisation which is actually putting the rallies in place in London for Tommy Robinson without declaring itself publicly, I think there's something deeply sinister in this, and I'm personally surprised that Tommy Robinson's campaign would want to get involved with people such as these. But really it comes down to people getting confused and angry as to what's been going on in UK. So let's have a little recap at the sort of material that's been going on over several years. We've got this coalition at war over migrant numbers at crisis point. Migrants take new jobs in Britain. Immigration is out of control. All this highly emotive stuff, perhaps rightly so, but what is this actually doing? Well, it's raising the climate in the community in Britain for trouble. I'll just add this one because alongside the headlines in the newspapers, you can see there, we've got other organisations which are also promoting immigration. I've chosen America itself, and these are organisations which are saying, well, America has actually got to accept more migration because it's good for America. Well, let's go on a bit. We've got this one here, which is another Telegraph article. Britain's population is to rise by 4.4 million in the next decade. We can go on here. Independent, UK population to rise by 10 million in the next 25 years, with net migration accounting for 50%. All of these historical reports, of course, and the BBC, UK population to top 70 million in 12 years. Now, a key point, which we'll come on to a little bit later, is, of course, all of these people have been invited into the country. To my knowledge, we haven't been invaded since 1066, I think it was. So everybody that's in UK at the moment has either been invited and come in legally, or they've been able to come through immigration controls and get into the country because of incompetence in the border controls of the UK. So an important point, these are people invited in. Who invited them in? The British government invited them in. We can go on because as numbers have increased in the country, so we've seen the press and media spin change to link migrants to potential terrorists. And this has also been done, of course, by singling out Islam. In the beginning, when we had migrants, nobody was interested in what religion they were. But now it's become convenient for the government that Muslim Islam equals terrorism, except when they're picked up by The Guardian, when apparently they can do a U-turn on this very important security subject. And then, of course, we've got the really cynical stuff. So having created a migrant crisis, what do the Western governments do, UK and the US in particular? They attempt to brand Russia as weaponizing migration. Well, I'm going to say to our audience today, with the best effort we can make in the time we have available here at the UK column, let's just have a look at how, in fact, the UK government has weaponized immigration. So we start off by the fact it has been encouraged. Initially, it was immigration from Commonwealth, but more recently, of course, from the EU. And we've been told that we have to have the immigration because otherwise we don't have a workforce or the skills. And at the early stages of immigration, there's been no mention, as I say, of religion. So that then takes us on to the fact that having done this, we've introduced race hate laws to suppress reasonable debate and free speech. And the Public Order Act 1986 is one of those. Local authorities have been used to drive a hidden pro-immigration agenda, particularly the inner London authorities under Tony Blair's Labour Party. And we know that because in the very early days, we got information out of those local authorities where people were warning us this was going on. What the government then did is a dispersal policy so that the number of migrants appeared less obvious to the general public. This is carefully orchestrated. There's no way this is coincidence. Then we've got chaos on the borders and border control, which assists the pro-immigration policy, and it deceives the public, but it also allows in criminal gangs who ultimately are to start to exert their wares in cities across UK. Where do we go? Well, we carry on. We lie and deceive the public as to the numbers, and we introduce newspeak to confuse people. So if you look at the language around immigration, and I'll come on to some of that, you can see this powerful propaganda exercise. We encourage refugee and asylum status immigration. We encourage diversity training. We encourage positive discrimination. Well, of course, we don't. This has been carried out by successive governments, and it has been policy across the Labour and the Liberal Conservative government. And follow it through, we've got introducing a Racial and Religious Hatred Act 2006, which further suppressed debate and free speech. And we then get this twist where suddenly we are interested in the religion of people, and Muslim Islam equates to a terrorist label. Follow that through, prosecute and promote Asian child abuse cases, ignore and suppress evidence of widespread child abuse across other racial groups. That's been, excuse me, that's been deliberate policy. And that takes us into the centre of the circle, where we're now using maximum state intervention to target, harass and prosecute any reasonable dissent with immigration policy. What does that achieve? Well, it's rubbing communities and society raw. I deliberately use that expression because that's from Saul Alinsky, and it's agitating and inflaming tensions, suppressing free speech, and essentially victimising the victims, whether it's the people invited into this country or people who've been long-standing residents of UK who are not happy with the policy.
Can I make two additions for a future version of this? The one area that I think should be on this is prevent. Because, of course, one of the things that prevent is intended to do is to cause trouble within the Islamic community itself and cause tension there, and thereby you can set one community off against the other.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to ask was, down at the bottom there, you were talking about border chaos. Was that Lynn Homer, Common Purpose Lynn Homer?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned her, Mike. Let's bring her on screen. Here she is. We just need to remind people that this Common Purpose trained leader, who was formerly the chief executive of Birmingham City Council, where she was so effective that elections were described as a banana republic and the rule book had been thrown out of the window, was promoted out of that job into the border agency, where, of course, she created chaos. She presided over years of chaos at the UK Border Agency. The Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration's report showed that assurances given by senior border agency officials to the Home Office Select Committee about security checks on cases and the size of the backlog appears to be incorrect. That's polite language for somebody who was lying. But what's happened to this lady? Well, of course, she was promoted, permanent Secretary, Department of Transport. Then she was promoted again, Permanent Secretary, HM Revenue and Customs. And this is key, that this immensely powerful common purpose man, Gus O'Donnell, head of the Civil Service as was, welcomed the announcement and said a wealth of experience working in the public service in central and local government would allow Homer to excel in her new role. Well, wherever she was, and particularly the border agency, she excelled by producing chaos and breakdown.
Now, she, of course, Common Purpose, and you mentioned in the earlier network diagram there the issue of the Islamic grooming gangs and the fact that these gangs were allowed to pursue their activities without too much trouble from local authorities.
Yep.
And of course, as we have highlighted on the UK Column website, with the with some of our articles, that Common Purpose right at the heart of that whole exercise there as well. So we seem to see them in multiple areas in this.
Yes.
Yes.
Indeed. We just remind people of the Newspeak language which I was mentioning. Now, this has come in from government. This is nothing to do with immigration. This is our government that's introduced this. Racism, prejudice, discrimination or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Xenophobia, that used to be a very big one with the BBC a few years ago. Dislike of or prejudice against people from other countries. Hate crime, of course, crimes committed against someone because of their race, religion, sexuality, disability or gender. What else have we got? Racial prejudice, prejudice or hostility towards people of another race or colour or of an alien culture. And diversity training is a course of instruction aimed at increasing the participants' cultural awareness, knowledge and skills in order to benefit an organisation by protecting against civil rights violations, by increasing the inclusion of different identity groups and promoting better teamwork. All of this is celebrating diversity, which our own governments have brought in order to create this whole mess in the first place. And of course, we've just watched the performance of the British government in Parliament with that Brexit debate, Mike. So is this credible? Absolutely utter chaos wherever we look. But the policy has been hidden in plain sight. Let's bring in the late Peter Sutherland, formerly UN Special Representative for Migration. He said the EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to, quote, undermine the homogeneity of European countries. So this is policy absolutely rammed in our faces. It is this man and his ilk who have created the problem in the first place. And as we're going to suggest, the aim of that is to create the breakdown, which we're now starting to see the Middle East Forum helping to promote on the streets. The British Council following through on the agenda, 9 ways to celebrate diversity. So this is a British quango, effectively, which is also challenging traditional society, causing breakdown, and ultimately it will be responsible for bloodshed on the streets. This is all part of David Cameron's big society agenda, and this is something a lot of people have forgotten. They think big society has gone away. No, it hasn't. We're actually watching it come into power as we speak. And if we just have a look at what immigration has been about, we can get a better feel. And against that background, we can start to consider what our own government has been doing. So we've put the Romans up first. Pizza's, of course, very popular these days, Mike. But 125,000 came in, roughly. These are rough figures, but they are very useful. If you're not sure what the Romans look like, there's something like this. They came by force and they stayed, unlike the majority of the immigrants today. We've got Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, difficult to assess, but 4 to 8% of the population. Then we got the Norman era post 1066, following another invasion, perhaps 5% of the population. The Middle Ages, we've got migrants from Jewish communities coming in, European in general, pre-EU, Huguenots, Germans, Polish, Asian and African, obviously much more recently in small numbers. Commonwealth migration is when we start to see a major change. Yeah. And it was the British Nationality Act 1948 which allowed subjects of the British Empire to come to Britain. And the figure quoted here from Migration Watch was between 50 and 80,000 a year. Daily Mail, I'm sorry, I should have a date for this graphic. I haven't. It's, I think, about 3 years ago. They're talking about the rise between 1951 and 2011, and they are claiming a jump of originally 1.9 million up to 7.5 million. We've got data here from
Office for National Statistics.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, where we can see the rapid increase in migration. These people not storming the beaches, not fighting their way into the country, invited in by the British government. And where do we see massive change? Well, this brings us back to Tony Blair and what was happening in those inner London boroughs. So I put to our audience today that to start to understand what's going on in the country, we have to take apart this very dark, devious policy, particularly by Blair's Labour, which was creating the situation we now find ourselves in. So let's remember some of the people involved. A while ago, UK column put out this headline: "Domestic terrorists, the cabal destroying Britain." We stand by that headline. After all, it was this or that group of people in government who were boasting that they were going to introduce a period of creative chaos in Britain. We now see that unfolding around us. We've got Peter Sutherland there boasting the EU was going to push migration. Blair opened the doors and brought in the draconian policy. And of course, we've now got Theresa May absolutely unable to tell the truth on this subject. So if we just come back to where we started, it's quite remarkable that we have got this agency of the US government, which is absolutely following not US government policy, but Israeli Zionist policy, which is now saying we are the people paying for the protests in Britain. And I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about how these things were set up. If people want to know more about that Middle East Forum, this is one of the sites that's got a great deal of information. So documents are listed. It's called powerbase.info. And if you go on that, you can search through their information based on official documents showing a great deal about what this organisation is up to and who is behind it. We'll leave it there. No doubt that report is going to produce an interesting mailbox for us. But to the UK column, it seems that there's some extremely dirty and dangerous agitation being conducted in the UK by agencies whose best interests are nothing to do with what men and women and families in this country need. We'll stay on this for the weeks to come. Thanks very much for joining us. We hope you are enjoying UK Column News. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider taking out a subscription, because we can only do what we do with your financial help. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.